Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, Shifts in the Energy Industry, an Analysis of Energy Impacts on State Economies. Our speaker today will be REMI Associate 1, Zachary Schofield, and Ian Spellane. Zachary supports REMI users across the nation, specializing in energy and environmental and economic development related projects from our Washington, D.C. office. Following the presentation, there will be an opportunity to have your questions answered. So please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A submission portal, and our presenter will answer them following the presentation. At this time, I will hand it off to Zachary to begin the presentation.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited about our analysis that we have. Just a little bit of, intro as to why we wanted to hold this webinar. A lot of discussion around the energy industry focuses on national level impacts, whether it be carbon emissions or electricity prices. And what we wanted to do was take a look at what an energy transition might look like for those regions that are reliant on the fossil fuel industry for a large majority of their economic output. So we're going to analyze a portion of some rural counties in Utah as kind of an indicator of what might be happening in other portions of the United States. With that, we'll dive right in. All right. Just a little quick agenda. I'll introduce REMI and give you some background information. I'll then pass it off to Ian. He'll give us some economic background on what's going on in Utah and the energy industry. We'll do a model demonstration, point out some key results. We'll go over the conclusions and have time for Q&A at the end. All right. REMI is in the business of improving public policy, and we do that by equipping policymakers with a series of economic models that allow them to test the short and long run impacts of the policy decisions that they have in mind. So we're not an advocacy organization. We're not trying to advocate for any certain outcome, but we do want to improve the policymaking process, whatever the policy might be. We do that by working with a variety of clients. This is just a sample of some of our clients that we have. You can see we run the gambit of private organizations, advocacy groups, government entities, and universities. And we're really proud not only of the work that we do, but the work that our clients are able to do with the models that we provide with them. We also have the opportunity to work on policy issues throughout the United States. And so we're able to custom build our models so that folks in Washington State and folks in New England can see county and very specific level analysis on the regions that they're interested in. All right, with that, I'll hand it on over to Ian.
Great, thanks, Zach. So we thought it was important to frame this discussion in terms of the national changes that are happening across the energy sector. So here we have a graph of energy use in the United States by source. The most notable part here is this sharp decline in coal that we see in the last 10 years. And that's kind of been split with a sharp increase in natural gas. Now, the reason for this sharp effect that we're seeing here is both economic and political. There's been political pressure to switch to cleaner forms of energy that have less emissions. So that's part of the reason for the decrease in coal. And then part of this is purely economic. With the rise in hydraulic fracturing, natural gas has become a lot cheaper and a lot more viable of an option as an energy source. And then also in the bottom right corner here, we see some nuclear as well as renewables that have become economically much more viable with advances in technology in the last 10 years. So while there's a lot of economic benefits here, this sharp decrease in coal has caused economic problems in different parts of the country. So we chose to look at one 3-county region in central Utah. We wanted to give more of a micro picture of what happened, what these large national energy shifts are doing to a local county, but a lot of these problems are happening across the country. So you could take the results that we explore here and extrapolate them to different parts of the country that are also going through energy transformations, notably in Appalachia, in Southern Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, you have communities that are going through sort of the same economic challenges and changes that we explore here. So a bit about the region that we chose here. This 3-county region here of Carbon County, Emery County, and Sevier County are fairly reliant on coal. There's a few other coal production facilities outside in Utah outside of these 3 counties, but we wanted to just really hone in on these 3. It's a large part of the economy for these 3 counties, 13.9 million short tons of extraction, which really drives that local economy. Coal production statewide is down more than 30% from 2010 to 2020, and that is expected to continue decreasing in coming years. So the economic situation that we're trying to model here is if this coal production goes down essentially all the way to 0, if that coal industry was completely eliminated from this portion of Utah, we want to explore the negative effects that that's going to have on the economy, and then also explore what are some ways that those job losses, those negative economic effects could be offset by growth in other sectors. So we chose tourism, manufacturing, and energy generation. With exploring the effects of the coal production going all the way to 0, it's a bit more complicated than just calculating the total number of coal jobs and eliminating those, because there's so many ripple effects through the economy. If those jobs are lost, that's that much income lost for people. Those people have less disposable income to spend in their local economies. So it's going to have some pretty sizable effects even outside of just that coal sector. We'll go to the next slide and go talk in a bit of detail about these, why we chose these 3 other sort of candidate sectors as potential boons for the economy. So the tourism industry is very big, very healthy in Utah, especially this summer. It's been a huge summer for the national parks. It's $10 billion statewide per year for the state. It's mostly concentrated in the national parks and ski areas, so that makes sense. The Salt Lake cities, the park cities drive a lot of that, but it's around over $200 million annually in this Uinta Basin, which is where these 3 coal producing counties are. So we want to see if that tourism were to increase, what kind of positive output or outcomes that could have that could offset the losses from coal. Also manufacturing. Utah has a fairly healthy and fairly diverse manufacturing background. A lot of different facilities that make a lot of different products, but a very small percentage of that. So it's almost $20 billion statewide for the entire manufacturing output, but only about 1% of that is in the Uinta Basin. So we think it's very feasible that if the coal jobs were to leave these communities, that some other manufacturing could come in, because there will be a lot of skilled labor ready for those manufacturing jobs there. And then thirdly, we looked at different forms of electricity generation. So as the coal jobs leave, there's definitely opportunity for other forms of energy production to move in. It's north of $500 million statewide in energy production. And as we'll see on a map on the next slide, there's a lot of potential for expansion of other forms of electricity generation outside of coal. So here we have a map of the same region. These black triangles that you see here are coal extraction sites, and the black circles are coal burning facilities. To the west, we have these yellow dots are solar facilities, and to the north, there are the lighter blue is natural gas burning facilities, and the darker blue are hydroelectric facilities. So there's a lot of infrastructure around the area for creating and moving energy. So it's very reasonable that as these coal sort of moves out of the region, that some other energy production facilities could move in, because a lot of the infrastructure and a lot of the labor capital is already there. We think it's very possible that as the coal moves out, other energy sectors could move in. That could be solar, could be nuclear, or could be more natural gas facilities. And then lastly here, I just want to clarify what the scope of this presentation is, and what answers we're trying to answer with the REMI model, and what questions that we're leaving off. So we definitely want to explore how many jobs will be lost if the coal industry disappears. As I said, this is it's beyond just the number of people that work directly in coal, because losing those jobs will have ripple effects. What level of output in other industries will, or what level of increase in output in other industries are required to replace these jobs? So in these other three sectors that we mentioned, in tourism, in manufacturing, and in other forms of energy, what kind of gains would we need to see to offset that job loss? And how's this going to look for a compensation lens for those workers? So people that lost a coal job, there's a lot of frictions. It's difficult to find another job, to change industry or sector, especially if you've been working in a job for several years, even several decades. So what's the compensation picture going to look like for people who are changing from a job in one industry to another? And a few things that are outside of the scope of what we're trying to cover today is what policies could either entice tourists or convince manufacturers to move to this Uinta Basin. Obviously, we would want to see some new business development in these areas to offset the loss in coal jobs, but we're not going to dive into exactly which type of policies we'd want to see to entice that. And then, or similarly, what kind of tax breaks or other incentives. So that's not what we'll be answering today. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Zach, who's going to introduce the REMI model and do a live demonstration of how we reached our results.
Great, thank you, Ian. Before I open up the model, I want to talk a little bit about the variables that we use. So we do our analysis in two parts. The first part is we purely simulate what does the economy look like if the coal industry production goes essentially to zero. And so we reduce detailed industry sales in the coal mining sector by about $503 million, and then spread that proportionally between the three counties. Now we reach that $503 million number by calculating the coal production in each county, multiply that by the average price, and then average that dollar amount over 5 years. And so coal production is shifting from year to year, but this is kind of the number that we land upon, this 503 average, $503 million average value of coal production in these counties. And then in the second section of our simulation, we then take each of these industries one by one, and we calibrate increases in the output of these industries to see what it would take in order to create the same number of jobs lost in the coal industry in these other industries. And so I'll briefly mention the dollar amounts that we're inputting, and we'll kind of come back to what the implications of these numbers are a little bit after the demonstration. So after some trial and error and some calibration, we land on this $260 million number for tourism spending. Basically what we're saying is if coal production leaves, then the tourism industry would need to increase by $260 million. Same thing for manufacturing. The manufacturing industry would have to increase by $350 million. And then the utilities industry sales, that simulates the energy generation industry, and that would need to increase by about $60 million in order to fill that shortfall in jobs that is left behind by the coal industry. Now, the model that we use today is called the E3 Plus model. It has all the capabilities of the PI Plus, our flagship model, but it has some capabilities that are more specific to the energy sector. There are modules that allow you to take a look at carbon emissions and pollution inputs, and you can take a look at fluctuations in energy consumption and demand. Now, we don't use all the capabilities of the E3 Plus model, but we chose this in order to use those energy sector specific variables. And so what we'll be doing is, you can see in this graphic to the right, this shows all the linkages within the model. And so we're going to manipulate output and then show how changes in output then impact the rest of the economy. All right, with that, I'll go ahead and hop out of the slide deck here, and we'll go over to the model itself. All right, just a couple things I'll point out. You can see we're using a Utah model. 29 regions represents each county in Utah. You can see this map. We have different regions for each county in the state, and the counties that we focus on are here: Carbon County, Emery County, and Sevier County, right here in central Utah in the Uinta Basin. Now, when you're ready to build a simulation, you click this button here. Ian and I have done this previously, so I'm just going to toggle to that page here. And again, at this page, you're able to select the different inputs that you want to verify. The models are built in a way where you can, go to this full list of inputs, take take a certain variable, and then simulate a shock or simulate some kind of change, an exogenous change to that variable, and then see how that impacts the rest of the economy. Again, Ian and I picked some inputs ahead of time. I'll go and just click to this page here. And you can see we now have these 4 industries that we wanted to analyze in our analysis. So our first simulation excluded all 3 of these other industries and focused only on coal mining. If we drop this down, you can see we've got the coal mining industry in these different regions that we're focusing on, and we simulate a drop in production to the tune of a couple $100 million. And this is, we input the value of $503 million, and then the model then spreads that evenly, proportionally to output in each of these counties. All right, and then one by one, we added and then subtracted each of these candidate industries to simulate what would happen, what would be necessary for each of these industries to fill the stopgap or to fill the gap. And so if we drop down tourism, you can see that, again, we're focusing on 3 counties. Tourism is split into 3 categories. We include all 3 of them, or 3 of the 4. The 4th one is local tourism spending, which we exclude here. And you can see we've now increased tourism spending by a few $1 million in each category. And we do the same thing with manufacturing and energy generation. Okay. Next, you then go to the forecast options. The page there just gives you a capability of running the simulation. We've done that ahead of time, so I'll go to the results. Now again, Ian and I combed through these results. We've pulled out a few that we thought were the most notable, but we'll point out a few key things here. In the economic summary page, you're able to take a snapshot of what's going on in the economy. Here I have the entire region, all regions selected. We can isolate one of these counties, let's say Emory County, and we're able to see what's happening in employment, in GDP, with prices, all the way from the present to 2060. We can take employment as well and take an even deeper dive into what's going on. We can look at what's going on in each county, which counties are gaining and losing employment over different years. And we can do the same type of analysis by industry. And you can see we get a fair level of detail. We can take a look at which categories of the economy are gaining and losing jobs. All right. Now I'll go ahead and stop there and transition back to the slide deck. Again, Ian and I have picked out a couple outputs, a couple results that we thought were most interesting. And so now I'll go on into the notable results. Okay, so first we're going to take a look at what happens to the economy when coal is removed from the economic picture with no compensation in other industries. You can see we lose about 1,900 jobs, and Carbon County really takes the brunt of that loss, losing over 1,000 jobs. That's because coal production is higher in Carbon County compared to the other 2 counties. And when we look at this in terms of percentage, you're seeing over 10% job loss in Carbon County. I'll note that these are comparisons to the baseline. So this is not ongoing. Every year there's another 10% of jobs lost. This is just compared to the baseline. If the coal industry stays the same, what year over year, what is the difference between those 2 scenarios? And so 10% of the jobs that otherwise would be in the economy are lost in Carbon County, and then similar numbers for and about 6% in Emory and Sevier counties. And you can truly understand, if unemployment is about national average, 3, 4, 5% in these counties, then you tack on another 10% loss with the loss of the coal industry, and you're looking at recession level unemployment levels that rival the Great Recession and the Great Depression. So this is quite a significant loss to the area. And if we take a look at job losses by economic sector, we also learned some quite, I think, significant lessons about what's going on in the economy. in this scenario, we've only reduced coal production, and that's housed in this natural resources economic sector, industry sector. And you can see we have job losses here that are significant, but that's not the only industry that loses jobs in this scenario. Construction takes a big hit, services takes a big hit, and you can really get a sense of all the supporting industries that are tied to the coal industry and how those losses then kind of ripple through the economy. Okay, now we'll go on to the scenarios where we did these trial runs to see if, okay, if there's another industry that can take coal's place, what would be necessary for the same number of jobs to come back? And so with that tourism, we wanted to simulate this industry because among policy leaders, this is often viewed as a candidate option. If there's hard industry that is leaving, perhaps you can replace it with some level of tourism. And in our calibration, we note that we would need to increase tourism spending by $260 million to get the same number of jobs. Now that's more than double the current, that's essentially doubling the tourism industry that's currently in that region. Not going to say that's impossible, but certainly a tall order if you're going to try to solely rely on the tourism industry to replace coal. And again, in manufacturing, the same number, $350 million increase. That's about 150% increase on current manufacturing in the area. Again, that's a pretty tall order. You might need some state level infrastructure investments to make that happen, maybe some state level tax incentives. Again, as Ian mentioned before, our analysis here doesn't really dive into what it would take to get this kind of output to the regions. We just wanted to see, what is the dollar value you would need an output for the same number of jobs to be created. But perhaps it's possible that a few large industry, a few large plants come to the area and you get most of that production. And then utility scales, the utilities sales looks a little bit more reasonable. Again, through our trial and error, it took about $60 million of output to get the same number of job creation. But again, the decision process for locating a power plant in a certain area is quite complicated. We note that there are coal plants in the area. There is an existing energy infrastructure there that could be utilized by a gas plant or by some other energy generating facility. But locating a solar plant or a wind plant has probably more to do with the insolation and the wind speeds in the area, and not so much to do with the actual energy infrastructure there. And then if we were talking about hydroelectric and nuclear power plants, those are industry specific decisions that are going on there. So our purpose isn't to say whether this is more likely than other scenarios, but just in strictly dollar terms, it does look like if you were able to get an energy generating facility there, that might be an easier ask than getting the tourism and the manufacturing sector there. All right, let's take a look at a few graphs. We've broken down the employment by the 3 different counties in this region, and we learned some pretty cool things, I think. So combined for the 3 counties, we get close to 0. That indicates a net 0 loss of employment between the coal industry and the tourism industry, but you can see that the job application is not equal. Emery and Sevier counties are able to recover significantly from the loss in coal industry, but Carbon County does not. You go from 11,000 roughly jobs lost to about 300. So you do gain a lot of them back, but not all the way. Broken down by industry sector, we see that the services sector where tourism is housed sees the employment increase, but the other sectors don't really see the same benefit. The construction industry still sees significant losses in employment. Certainly natural resources where the coal industry is housed continues to see losses. These losses are perhaps muted from a scenario where you simply have a loss in the coal industry, but there seems to be not as much spillover between the tourism industry and the coal industry. And I think when we think about why that might be, that seems rather intuitive. These are just very different industries. Okay, focusing on manufacturing, we see a similar story. Emery County and Sevier County are able to recover. Again, the depth of loss in Carbon County makes it so that when we get to employment parity in the region, Carbon County is still lagging a little bit behind. And then in the industry specific scenario, we see a similar story to what we saw with tourism, but in this case it's manufacturing. So manufacturing sees a significant increase in employment. Other industries are still net loss in employment, but other than the natural resources sector, those losses might be muted to some extent. And then finally, if we take a look at a scenario where only electric generation is taking the job gains from carbon from the loss in the coal industry, then we see that Sevier County benefits tremendously from this kind of scenario, where Emory and Carbon County do not. In fact, Carbon County is probably worse off in this kind of scenario. They are still at over 800 jobs lost year over year. And that's in part because Sevier County currently houses, a couple coal-powered power plants right now, and so if investment were to come to the area, it's likely that it would go to Sevier County, and these neighboring counties might not see the same benefit. Okay, but when we take a look at the industry-specific job breakdown, this does paint, perhaps a little bit better picture for the different sectors at play. Natural resources still takes the hit because coal mining has been lost, but construction and retail and wholesale trade, transportation industries, these see a net gain in employment. And then other industries like finance, they're essentially net zero. So they, whether they're servicing coal power, coal mines or power generating facilities, that's their industries, their employment outlook is pretty much the same. All right, so when we take a look at all three of these candidate industries, there are costs and benefits to each of them. Certain industries gain more than others. And then when we take a look at the compensation basis, we, again, I think get more information as to what kind of industry would be best for the region. So in each of these scenarios, each of these lines, the number of jobs is the same, but compensation is not. And this is measured in total earnings earned by the macro economy. You can see that in the tourism scenario, there's about $120 million of wages that are still lost in the economy, even though the same number of jobs are present. Manufacturing sees a similar hit, but it's much smaller. But electricity generation, you see about the same number of jobs, or sorry, not the same level of compensation in the economy. And then it starts to rise towards the end of the time period. Okay, now I hope that was digestible. What we're doing is fairly abstract, but as we did this analysis, we realized that it's probably not a likely real world scenario to have only one industry be totally relied upon to replace the jobs that are lost in another industry. It's more likely that several industries together will either receive government support or some kind of local level focus in order to increase employment. And so as kind of a final analysis, we ran all of these three sectors together, did the same calibration to see what size, what increase in output would be necessary to gain the same level of employment. And we learned some really interesting things. So with all these three together, tourism only needs to increase by 70 million, manufacturing by 100 million, and utilities by 30 million. They're still large quantities. You're still looking at a 30%, 33% increase in tourism spending. Still kind of a tall order. 50% increase in manufacturing sales. Still quite a tall order, but certainly more feasible than the 260 million, the 350 million dollars we were looking at before. And all combined, this is we would need an additional $200 million in output spread between these three industries to get the same level of employment, and that's a far shorter ask than what we were seeing for the tourism and the manufacturing industries, for example. And we'll take a look again in a scenario where all these three industries combined. We have that same spread of employment. Sevier County is still benefiting the most, likely because of the energy generating facilities that are already located there. The employment picture looks by industry looks pretty good. There's still the losses in the natural resources sector, but you'll notice that a lot of these sectors kind of zero out. Like finance and insurance are pretty much zero. Retail and wholesale trade are pretty much zero. And so these industries just see net zero job losses or gains. But then manufacturing gains a lot. Transportation and construction also has some gains in the economy. And then when we compare compensation, this combined scenario is, slightly less than electricity generation, but, we're still looking at near parity on wages there. You're looking at, maybe $20 million in lost wages between these three counties. And so not quite to zero, but certainly better than scenarios where we relied only on manufacturing or only tourism. Okay, that's the analysis there. I'm going to pass it off to Ian now to kind of focus on a few of the main conclusions that we saw, and then we'll have time for Q&A.
Thanks, Zach. So as we said, two things I just want to reiterate from the beginning of the presentation. A lot of the results that we derive here, we think really can be applied to other areas of the country that are going through similar energy transitions. So while we were specific to Utah, these findings I think are pretty widely applicable, as well as the REMI model, E3+, could model a multitude of different scenarios. We picked really just one situation of many that could become possible. But our main conclusions from this analysis were, first, that prosperity is possible even with these tough job losses from coal. There's many different avenues towards rebounding. But it is a large percentage of this local economy. But through other industries, there's definitely plenty of paths to prosperity. Secondly, prosperity is much easier achieved through diversification. So just as it's easier to lose a large percentage of jobs when a local economy is so focused on one industry, like in coal, there's a lot of exposure to large economic downturn when the economy is so focused on one industry. So as we look towards these potential bounce backs, a lot of these possible scenarios are a lot more feasible if the economy is more diverse. So as Zach explained, when we have just one industry trying to bounce back and recover all of these jobs, it's a very unlikely scenario. But if we sort of spread across multiple industries, it's a much easier path to economic success. And the industries can carry some synergy between each other. The industries are not equal. It's as the economy changes so much in all these different sectors, it's easy to assume that people can just jump from one job to another, but it's very difficult. There's a lot of frictions. People who've been working in one job for many years or decades don't necessarily want to switch. There can be different education requirements. And then as we saw with tourism, those jobs may be able to create some new job creation, but they will not necessarily pay as well as the jobs that were lost. And lastly, economic modeling enables planning. And this is just a great takeaway from REMI, that understanding the future dynamics of the changes that are going to come is really the first step towards proactive steps towards a more sound economic future. Whether that be mitigating the negative effects of something like a downturn in coal jobs, or maximizing new economic opportunities. Economic modeling really enables you to come up with a cohesive plan for how a local, state, or national economy is going to address the changing climate. So just as we wrap up our discussion with economic modeling here, why we find it so important. First, to just clarify the issues and scenarios that you're approaching. So understanding all of these different issues, REMI has a suite of different models. So we use the E3+ today, but there's also the Transite model, the Policy Insight model, the Tax Policy Insight model, as well as our new DEI model, it's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, that allows you to get a really wide view of any sort of economic issues or potential scenarios you want to look at. And that ensures that public policy is serving the public as best as it can. Secondly, the accurate predictions that the REMI model has allows you to be proactive about emerging trends and draw out dozens of future scenarios before actually enacting any policy, and makes your time, energy, and money spent in your predictions much more accurate and worthwhile. And lastly, to inform with a really robust data-driven set of standard metrics, as opposed to just pursuing one ideology or intention. And this allows you to best help the stakeholders within any communities that you may be serving.